Welcome into the AL Recruiting Podcast. Today we are excited to have Grant Hizer joining us on the podcast. He is a scouting assistant and as he put on Twitter, the official numbers nerd at SMU football. Grant, we're glad to have you, man.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Well, man, I was intrigued, and Grant and I, we don't know each other. We just met right before I started this podcast, but I saw you had a post that you put out where it was just stats and data, and I love data. And it's a comparison of Group of Five to Power Five transfers, and kind of the portal is huge news in recruiting. It's this new thing, and I think that what we want to get into today is talk about. There's this idea out there that Group of Five guys can transfer to Power Five schools and almost increase their draft status. So we're going to talk a lot about the data you put out today and dive into that.
Sounds good.
Well, Grant, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, how did you get into doing numbers?
Man, so I've just always really liked numbers since I was a kid. Like my dad gives me grief, tells me about times like growing up at the dinner table, like 2, 3 years old. Me and my brother would be arguing about like stats off the back of baseball cards, just off like memory, just start going back and forth about players that way and stuff. So like always just enjoyed sports, always enjoyed numbers. So then, man, growing up, played a little bit of everything, but I really fell in love with football. Played at Union High School up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Gosh, one of like 7 or 8 schools actually had 2 guys drafted. So I had to shout out my boys, Ricky Stromberg and Isaiah McGuire. Played with them. But yeah, so I always loved it. Like something I thought I wanted to get into because like in my mind, if I get to just mess around with sports and numbers every day, like that's not a job. That's just having fun for me. So yeah, I came down to SMU and I was actually studying computer science at first, but then had like a sports data class in like our school of sports management or something that like I just sort of found like, hey, anyway, I can take this, email the right people, and then it got interested. This is for sure what I want to do long term. So I switched over to data science and stat as my major, and yeah, I've been chugging along since. Got plugged in with our football team once like the sort of like the staff change happened with Dykes leaving, then Lashley coming in. Sort of wondering like how the new staff felt about it. So I had a friend, Will Gibson, who was our recruiting GA this past year, but I knew him from like class and like the gym and everything of all places. So I'm like, hey, how they feel about this. He'll get me plugged in with our GM, Alex Brown. Interviewed, and yeah, I've been working with the team for the past like year and a half now, just being the numbers guy, analytics, helping with some scouting, recruiting too, just whatever they need. So yeah.
Well, I think you've got into analytics at the right time, and people can criticize it, but man, it's undeniable. I always say the numbers don't lie, and teams are loving analytics now. Now, I'm gonna ask, and you may can say or not, but did SMU ask you to put out this report? Was this just a number that you were interested in, kind of post draft, as we started to look at this idea of, hey, I can advance my draft status using the portal, transferring to a Power Five school from a Group of Five school? Was this something that you were asked to do, or you just thought, man, this is something I want to know about?
So actually stemmed from a tweet from Liberty's DPP Colton Corn, the guy who like posted that and everything. So I think got it pulled up. He said something about may mess around and do a study of 1 year G5 to P5 transfers, how may actually improve their stock by going P5 and how many didn't get drafted at all. See if that recruiting pitch these teams try using our guys' DMs are actually valid. So it was like something that came from him with the date, April 29th. It was probably like right on the heels of the draft or everything, or just probably bad, I think, to keep a guy. But I saw that and I knew I was going into final season. We sort of had a mutual connection, followed each other on Twitter. So I'm like, well, I mean, I'll have time to just sort of like pick away at this while I'm in the middle of finals, just use it as a little study break from my actual class. Like, okay, cool. Research another like year for the transfer stuff. We'll go back to studying, do another year of the all conference guys, go back to studying. Like, so I picked away at it and sent it to him. So it was actually originally done for him finishing up school and everything. I've been a student assistant. Don't know for sure what's next steps. So I'm like, man, get my name out there more. I'm like down to help whoever do whatever kind of project, really get my name out there more, get more practice in. So sent it to him. Actually updated the logos and colors, sent it to Alex, our guy. Had another coach reach out, so I sort of updated the colors, added their logo, sent it to him so he could send it to their staff. But yeah, it sort of came from one Coach Corn's questions. I'm like, yeah, no, easy.
I actually saw the same tweet. And when then I saw the stats come out, I was like, wow, who did this? Who put this out? And because I remember
Yeah.
him posting that about like, what does that look like? And so if you're wondering, you want to have these numbers in front of you, follow Grant. His Twitter handle is right here on the screen. Follow him. You can pull that data up and look at this as we kind of talk about this. But is it group of 5 guys that are transferring to Power 5 schools kind of in that last year? Most of them in your opinion, would they be all conference guys if they stayed at their group of 5 schools?
I mean, that was just sort of the biggest assumption with this study. And like you obviously want with statistical studies, sort of want to limit like broad assumptions. However, sort of operate on the idea that if a Power Five guy is trying to bring um, a kid in from a G5 school, they're not just bringing them in to ride the bench. They're bringing them in because they think they're a baller, because they've seen them be able to show out against G5 competition, and you want them to do the same for you. And like not always the case. There's like one or two guys like there's a quarterback. I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was pretty much like had a handful of spot starts for his G5 school, transferred into a P5. You could tell it's like, yeah, cool. He's going there to be their third string quarterback. He's going there to be a sort of a veteran leader, that kind of thing, not really trying to improve draft stock. So there were a couple small outliers like that. But I mean, sort of the assumption is like, I feel like with most schools, be it G5 or Power 5, if you're bringing a kid in, it's because you think he's good enough to be at least all conference at the G5 level, even if you're a G5 school. It's like, yeah, bringing a new kid because I think he can be a stud here. Power 5 school, bringing a kid from lower level in, just because he's been a stud, we think he can be a stud here.
Okay. So I just wanted to kind of clear that up because most of the assumption is if they stayed at the group of 5 school their final year, they would have probably
Yeah,
been, or at least had a chance to be all conference in where they were
yeah.
playing.
If
Okay.
they hadn't been already.
What about the data when you broke all this down? What really stood out to you the most? The numbers that you have.
I mean, there were a few things that really stood out. One is just sort of how rapidly the number of these like G5 Power 5 transfers are increasing. Like even just looking at that offseason, that 2019-2020 offseason, there are about 60 total guys, like not just counting 1 year, but 1 year, 2 year, multiple year guys. That number in the next offseason jumped to 104. And then in this past offseason, the 21-22 offseason, there is 147 guys who
Mm-hmm.
moved from the G5 to the Power 5 ranking. So that's just sort of climbing. And even just looking at the 1 year guys, that number jumped from roughly like 20 to 40 to 60 over that same time frame. So like that's just jumping up as like the transfer portal sort of takes off too. Um, it's sort of interesting seeing how COVID affected this sort of thing. Because you saw the guys who played their final season in 2019 for both the transfers and all conference guys, the number of them that got like any kind of NFL shot, tryout, UDFA, all that kind of, it sort of just dropped and bottomed out because there wasn't a true rookie mini camp that year with COVID and everything.
Right.
So if you weren't drafted or if you weren't like a high priority UDFA, you weren't really getting a shot. Or then in 2020, you see some like the draft numbers actually jump up a little bit because with the COVID year and everything, if a guy heard back from the NFL, didn't really like what he was hearing about his draft grade, about his stat, he's like, I can just stay another year in college, no harm, no foul. So
Yeah.
yes,
Um,
that's the biggest things.
yeah, I think to me, looking at this and I think everybody, to make it a simple breakdown, is just mind blowing to me that in 2019, the number of players that transferred from group of 5 to Power 5 in their final college season was 28. Okay. And then, like you said, the rapid progression of that all the way to 2022 is 61 players transferred from group of 5 to Power 5. However, the players drafted, the numbers was 2 in 2019 out of that group of players that transferred. And then there was only 3, even though the number more than doubled, that transferred to
Yeah.
Power 5 schools.
So yeah, no, it's weird that like that's not even going up as much. Like it's not going up with each other or anything. It's if you're gonna get drafted if you're a stud, but just because you're moving up, like you're seeing a lot more kids move up just to be backups now too.
Yeah. And And we know this. I mean, there's only so many players that are drafted, but there's still so many opportunities in the NFL to be an undrafted free agent, to get invited to camp. I mean, just this draft season, after the draft, there was a kid that I think he's from East Carolina. He posted his practice film and he got
Oh yeah,
signed to a team.
I say Winstead. Yeah,
Yeah. And so, I mean, it was just from him posting that, kind of going viral on social media, like, this guy deserves a shot. Look at this film. And I think the thing that, when you really break it down on that, specifically with the 2022 total, so 61 players transfer from group of five to power five, and players with no NFL tryout or invite was 36. And so the no tryout rate out of that group is 60%, basically. So only
yeah.
40% of those guys even got a shot to make a team, really.
Yeah.
And when you look at, if you stayed at your school, it's set, the number is 75%. You got a 75% shot of getting a chance to make it in the NFL.
Yeah, at least getting to go to a rookie mini camp, get more coaches' eyes on you, just get legit
Yeah.
shots. So
Yeah, you don't get a chance if you don't go to minicamp. like I mean, that's
yeah,
just, I mean, you may can take the XFL, CFL, AFL route now, but I mean, these guys are wanting to get that chance. Like, everybody that's going to watch this and listen to recruits and the players that are in school, they want a shot at the NFL. And all I try to do is inform guys of the best path to get there. And your numbers show, for the most part, staying at your school and balling out is really huge. I mean, there's so many paths to the NFL. Like, what do you think that, again, these numbers should tell us, as far as like group of five staying at your school and becoming an all conference? Like, what is it telling us here?
I mean, if anything, it's telling you like the biggest thing you got to do that last year is be somewhere where you're playing, have good film, and just sort of show out a bit. Because like if you're going to a bigger school and they end up just not playing as much, you're not starting. It's like it's harder for a team to think, hey, he wasn't even starting at his college. Is he going to be able to have a good shot here? Because even sort of like thinking about it from like the way we recruit to high school some is like you get some of your guys who man just had physical limitations for playing at the next level, all that kind of stuff. So like they weren't really like didn't have this D1 size or speed or something like that to be recruitable. It's like, but they showed out. They're like all district performers. They had really good stats. So it's like, hey, we can take more of a flyer of a kid on this kid as a PWO. And I feel like that's sort of the same way some of these like NFL teams may view it, to where it's like, hey, he doesn't necessarily have some of the true size, speed, that kind of requirements that we look for in our players, like for to draft and be like a legitimate dude that way. However, man, if he had 2,000 rushing yards, he's probably doing something right. Like we may as well bring him in for a camp kind of deal. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest undrafted free agents in the last 2 or 3 years is James Robinson,
yeah,
the running back. Starred for Jacksonville, and I think he's on the Jets now.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or that's coached by our running backs coach at SMU right now, Coach Hall, one
yeah,
of his boys. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, so you look at it and think, again, you do what you do, you get your chance, and I don't know his numbers right offhand. I don't know why he went undrafted, but he obviously put it on the film, and that's why they picked him up. And he said, you know what, this is he made the most of his opportunity when he was at Jacksonville his rookie year.
Exactly.
You're a numbers guy, analytics. What's your recommendation to players that may be watching this?
I mean, personally, that's always hard for me to do because I don't know exactly what's going on in players' lives, what their situation is like at their current school, what other stuff they're hearing. Especially with like this new day and age of NIL, like man, you could just have like some family stuff for other reasons going on to where, hey, you need more money right now, even if it's not as good long term. But I mean, just looking at these numbers from a long term point of view, if your number one goal is just to get a shot at the NFL, it's like if you want to get drafted, if you want to have a chance to be in front of guys, because man, I'm sure a lot of guys watching this believe, hey, if I get in front of these coaches, I'm gonna be able to show them what I do. I'm gonna ball out, and they're gonna just want to keep me on their team. It's like if that's what your goal, if that's your idea, it's like, man, best like all out where you're at too, man. The grass ain't always greener on the other side. So if you got a chance to just really show out, just dominate your competition, show that hey, you have the skills to dominate competition, as opposed to hey, it's not going somewhere where it's not even a guarantee that you start. Nonetheless, they're able to like play super high level. It's like, man, do that, ball out, and everything will take care of itself because the NFL is going to find studs like wherever they're at.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think specifically we're talking to a group of people who are really looking at 1 year and that last year. And it's like, can you wait 1 year? Because NIL money is nice in the short term, but there's nothing like NFL money.
Amen.
I mean, there's nothing that's going to pay you long term like the NFL is going to. Specifically when we're talking about guys that are 1 year. We're not talking to freshmen that are transferring that, first year and things may not have worked out at your school, but we're talking specifically to guys that have a shot to be all conference and make an impact your final year of school and get drafted, get invited to mini camp, become an undrafted free agent. Your shot really, when you look at these numbers, is best if you stay at your group of 5 school and do what you're doing.
Yes, sir.
Well, Grant, man, keep putting out some good analytics. I love numbers, and I may send you another message. You put something else out, I'm gonna have you on to kind of decipher these numbers a little bit, and as we break it down, because I think,
sounds good.
Yeah, I think college coaches look they should be playing this podcast for their players. That's what next team meeting my group. If I'm a group of 5 coach, I'm gonna throw this podcast up like, hey, follow this guy and see what he's putting out there, and so they can be well informed of their opportunities that are ahead of them.
Yes, sir. Sounds good.
All right, buddy. Well, all the best. We wish you nothing but the best. And man, appreciate you being on. Everybody, I appreciate everybody listening. Follow Grant. If you want to know more numbers, follow us to help us to continue to help players be recruited, help players that are already in college. Subscribe. We appreciate everybody for listening. Thanks again, Grant.
You're welcome, man.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Y'all have a good one.